Welcome to Overcaffeinated and Out of Effs, the podcast for burned out, career-minded moms who are ready to stop pretending everything's fine and feel like themselves again. I'm your host, Christy Amir, burnout coach for moms, licensed therapist, and mom of two. And I'm here to help you reclaim your energy, your identity, and your peace of mind. Whether you're lying awake thinking about the 87 things you didn't get done, or silently resenting the people you love most, this is your space to feel seen, supported, and not so alone. So grab your coffee, hot, cold, or day old, and let's get into it. Hey everybody, it's Christy. Welcome to Overcaffeinated and Out of Effs. In today's episode, I'd like to welcome our guest, Sarah Boes. Sarah is the founder of Sarah Michelle NP Reviews and formerly served as the Chief Nursing Officer at Blueprint Test Prep. She's also a board member for Conquering CHD and a committee chair member for Children's Heart Foundation Annual Cincinnati Walk. Sarah has extensive experience in oncology, intensive care, and nursing education. After obtaining her family nurse practitioner degree in 2020, she launched SMNP Reviews, an innovative platform that rapidly grew to a seven-figure business within 7 months. Following SMNP Reviews' acquisition by Blueprint in 2022, Sarah transitioned to a role where she continued to oversee the nursing vertical while integrating cutting-edge educational technologies. Sarah's entrepreneurial journey is deeply intertwined with her personal life. Her daughter, Meadow, born with severe heart defects, has required extensive medical care, inspiring Sarah's commitment to pediatric cardiac research and care. In recognition of Meadow's journey, Sarah has become a congenital heart disease activist and philanthropist. Beyond her business success, Sarah is a passionate advocate for mental health and female entrepreneurship. Her own experiences with anxiety and OCD have fueled her mission to help others manage mental health challenges, particularly within high-stakes environments like healthcare. She was recently honored with the Baylor Landrum Jr. Leave a Legacy Award in recognition of her leadership and dedication to improving the community through giving. Sarah aims to further her impact through philanthropy, focusing on congenital heart disease and mental health advocacy while supporting ongoing advancements in pediatric healthcare. So I have
it's a lot to hear it. Yeah, it is a lot to hear it read to me. I'm like, oh, hello.
I know, but it just goes to show, how much you have done. You have all these accomplishments and and obviously, you're here today because we're hoping to chat a little bit about your work, about your story, as a working mom, especially, as a mom who did struggle with parenting a chronically ill child. And also, of course, facing your own challenges with anxiety and OCD, which a lot of working moms can really relate to. And so I'm really excited to be chatting with you today. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me and letting me share my story because what I hope people get from the conversation and kind of the story is I really like to help people rewrite what's possible. And I think there's a lot of inherent narratives that we have around motherhood. And I'm really trying to rewrite some of those too.
Okay, well, great. And, and as we just mentioned, you have quite the impressive list of professional accomplishments. You've really done a lot. I'm wondering though if you can maybe start by telling us a little bit more about yourself personally outside of work. So maybe a bit about your family, the season of motherhood you are currently in, those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's like, where do I start? Do I start from the beginning? I'm like, I grew up in really rural Eastern Kentucky. And so I think family has always been really inherently important to me. And I always envisioned being a mom and having my own kids. And I didn't know exactly what that would look like, but I was the oldest of three girls. So I feel like I was very kind of ingrained in the role, if that makes sense. And so what today looks like for me is it's me, my husband, our beautiful and incredible 3.5-year-old daughter. Her name is Meadow. And over the last few years, I actually sold my business. I still worked as an employee with inside of it, but I sold my business just about 2 months before she was born, and that was kind of coincidental timing. It wasn't purposeful. A lot of people are like, "Oh, you were pregnant, so you sold your business." And I'm like, "No, that, like, so discredits me as an entrepreneur, like, I just wanted to squash that right now." But it ended up being this really beautiful synergistic timing that I couldn't have timed it any better because I sold my company in the middle of June 2022, and we got Meadow's diagnosis in July of 2022, and then she was born in August. And so I felt like a lot of this season of motherhood for me and who I am outside of work is I am a heart mom. I do so much advocacy work in so many different spaces trying to touch this issue as much as I possibly can to impact the future of children like her that are also born with heart defects, but also to impact her personal future too. We are kind of I feel like this season, if I had to label it or name it, is this like season of waiting in a lot of senses because we don't know exactly when Meadow's next open heart surgery is going to be. We just know there's going to be one. And so it could be this year, it could be
Mhm.
next year, it could be when she's 5 or 6. And I am really trying hard to combat my OCD all the time and not just be lost in all the thoughts I could be having about that and be a really like present, fun, like my like word of the year was like radiant and vibrant. Like I want to like show up fully and presently as a mom and enjoy this in between that we have between big surgeries.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of that. And when you talk about the waiting, knowing that the surgery is coming, but not knowing when, I can imagine that that must be very, very challenging, just the unknown, right? And all of those sorts of things. So when your daughter was born, I'm wondering, like, do you mind just telling us a little bit about what was that experience like for you, when you learned about her diagnosis? And not just medically, but also just emotionally for you as a mom.
There's so many different layers because I am a family nurse practitioner. And so I kind of had my medical lens on the situation, but I also very much had like my personal lens on the situation. And to just be really frank and transparent, to find out at 36 weeks pregnant that this baby you thought was, I mean, normal, such a subjective word, but normal and
Mhm.
healthy and hopefully going to be happy. Baby was very, very sick. And not only did she have one heart defect, but she had four. And now her first week of life, like we're going to be having open heart surgery. And it was just like such a spin. Like it was terrifying. It was horrific. And very unfortunately for me at the time, I had no idea yet that I had OCD. And so
Mm.
I kind of went through an OCD meltdown, even though I didn't have the language or the expertise around it quite yet.
Mhm.
Because what ultimately happened was my work wife, who I love and adore, did this incredibly sweet thing for me when I was around 33, 34 weeks pregnant and hosted a surprise baby shower.
Mhm.
And for most people, like, that's awesome.
Mhm.
For me, that was actually a really big deal because, like I said, I didn't know I had OCD and I didn't know what I was doing, but I had all of these like weird behaviors where I was like, if I announce I'm pregnant, something will happen to the baby. If I have a baby shower, something will happen to the baby. If I put together a nursery, then something's going to happen to the baby. And so to have this jarring experience of, I made it to 34 weeks, I'm like, we're kind of good at this point. Like any point after this that we have the baby, like the baby's probably going to make it, right? That's how like my
Mhm.
medical brain was working. Um, but to have the experience of having the surprise baby shower and then immediately finding out that, oh, hey, actually she has 4 heart defects and now you've got this lifelong care and like we don't know what it's going to look like and all this stuff in my warped OCD brain, I thought that I had caused her heart defect. And It's so hard to explain to people when you haven't lived with the disorder, or you haven't seen someone really with it, because we have all these stereotypes of what OCD is, and we can talk about that more if you want. But long story short, like, my nurse practitioner brain knows hearts are formed at, like, week 5 or 6 in pregnancy. Like, me having a baby shower at 34 weeks had nothing to do with Meadow having all these heart defects. But logic doesn't really work on OCD, which is a big
Mhm.
learning curve. And so, like, the day we got the diagnosis, for probably the 2 to 3 hours after that, I must have apologized to my husband 1,500 times.
Mhm.
Like, I could not stop. Like, we were just in the car driving home. I was like, I'm sorry, this is my fault, I'm so sorry." And it's everybody would people who were looking at me from the outside are just like, "Oh, like, she's in shock." Um,
Mhm.
but I really, like, there's this phrase that my OCD therapist used, and she's like, "1 in a million times OCD will get it right," and that was kinda my 1 in a million time, and I just didn't know how to manage and deal with it, and it was really, really hard.
Well, and so I'm wondering, so you had this experience, with your surprise baby shower. At what point did you recognize for yourself that it was something more, that it wasn't, you mentioned people from the outside and what they might have been, thinking when they were with you. But I'm curious, like, how did you know that it was something bigger, something more to really get additional support for yourself?
So, to give you kind of the trajectory, we had Meadow in August. She had her first surgery, that first like, she was literally 6 days old, and then we actually had this really cool, they call it interstage time, where we got to come home between surgeries. So between her first surgery and her second surgery, they literally called it the most high-risk time of her life, but we lived close enough to the hospital, and she was doing well enough that they're like, "You can go home in this in-between time, but the caveat is you kinda have to turn your home into a mini hospital." And so what I mean by that is,
Mhm.
like, literally, and I do mean literally every single day, we talked with our cardiologist, and we were submitting oxygen saturations and exactly how many ml she ate and weighing her and doing all these things that they would normally do at the hospital, because ultimately that in between time she had a patch in her heart. I mean, I think that's the easiest way to describe it. And if that patch went bad, then she emergently needed her second surgery.
Mhm.
And so everybody was just kind of like with bated breath, like watching her. And that created a lot of compulsions for me.
Mhm.
And I was just constantly checking, 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 checking. And the thing that's kind of insidious and very sneaky about OCD as well is things that you wouldn't even imagine are compulsions are also compulsions. So, for example, reassurance seeking. So I would look at my husband and be like, "Do you think she's okay? Like, do you think her patch is okay? Do you think this?" But, like, in all reality, can he answer those questions?
Mhm.
No.
Right. Mhm.
And, it might, like, satiate my anxiety for a moment when he's like, "Yeah, like, I think she's good today." But OCD becomes a cycle of, like, "Okay, I asked once this time, but the next time I might ask 2 or 3 times." And then I'm, like, asking 15 times, like, "Are you sure she's okay? Like, what do you think?" And he's like, "I mean, I really don't know."
Mhm.
But we kind of had a really tough time with her second surgery. Her patch did go bad, and we had kind of had to emergently go into the second set of surgeries, and it was kind of like every complication that could have happened did. And then we spent 2
Mhm.
months living in the ICU. We spent all of her first holidays in the ICU. We come out. We finally are home. And now they're kind of like, "You have a normal baby for now, so go live your life." And so to spend 6 months, like, that deeply ingrained in all of this, like, compulsive behavior, which in some ways was appropriate, and in other ways, it kind of taken on new life, and then to go home and be like, "Okay, disconnect the monitor, and we
Mhm.
don't need to talk to the cardiologist." Like, that was such a shift for my brain, I just couldn't
Mhm.
turn it off,
Mhm.
and I mean, we had been home a couple of days. I mean, I felt like I couldn't sleep. And people always talk about, like, oh, like, moms after they have their babies, like, they'll get up and they'll watch them breathe. But for me, like, it was on this, like, new level of I might count her breaths, but I might count 150 of her breaths.
Mhm.
And then I would, like, lay down and sleep for 20 minutes, and I would get up and do it again. So it was, like, very much interfering with my ability to just, like, be a normal human and a normal person to the point that I felt like I was gonna go into, like, some sort of psychosis. I was like, I feel super unwell, and we
Mhm.
had been home less than 2 weeks from all that hospital time when I went and got an OCD diagnosis. Because I was like, "I don't know what this is, but I can't live
Mhm.
my life like this."
Mhm. How did I'm curious, like, how did things change for you once you did go and get that official diagnosis?
I feel like my whole life changed. I know that sounds really dramatic, but for me, it was a really pivoting, life altering, life changing experience to finally understand how my brain worked and why I do things the way
Mhm.
that I do them. And now that I understand how it works and the way it compulses and the way it obsessives, because obviously to like build and sell a multi-million-dollar business in 2 years, like there's got to be some obsession there. Like there's something weird about even being able to do that.
Mhm.
Um, and once I figured out that I had it and I knew what the thing was, then I could actually do to work to manage it.
Mhm.
Because with OCD, and we talked about, reassurance seeking, a lot of normal cognitive behavioral therapy, you can get a ton of reassurance over
Mhm.
and over and over and over. And the gold standard for OCD is actually not that at all. It's something called ERP, which is exposure and response prevention. And you essentially go and face your worst fears head on, realize you don't die, and then you go and do it again. But it
Mhm.
desensitizes you in the process.
Mhm.
So that way you can go back to living your life without having 8 to 10 hours of my day wrapped up in doing all these compulsions. And it wasn't just like checking the breathing and the medical stuff. Like it had really leached into all areas of my life by that point.
Mhm. Well, and I'm wondering, for other, women who struggle with this, what misconceptions do you personally think exist about anxiety and OCD, specifically like in motherhood, especially among, successful, capable women?
Well, I think I'll start with misconceptions about OCD
Mhm.
because I had my own preconceived notions of what it was. Like, I'm a medical provider, like, I should have a baseline knowledge. And I really didn't understand because if I had, I would have known I'd had it, right?
Mhm.
So, a lot of people, when they think about OCD and what they see in the media, is that it's hand washing and somebody
Mhm.
just washing their hands 1,000 times over. And that's a piece of it, but that's simply essentially a symptom of a bigger problem. So when someone is washing their hands 100 times, it's because they want to have absolute certainty that whatever germ they're worried about or sickness or whatever that thing is for them isn't going to happen. And so with OCD,
Mhm.
what it is at its core is an intolerance of uncertainty. And you know, that's really hard because everything in life is uncertain. Like, even the things you think are 1,000%, at the end of the day, like, there's always a degree of uncertainty. And so being able to sit in that uncertainty and not let these thoughts of anxiety or compulsions over different things that you're doing run your life can be really hard. I think the other thing is like I get really frustrated when people are like, "Oh, like, I'm a little OCD," or "I'm OCD about
Mhm.
this,"
Mhm.
because, OCD is one of the top 10 most debilitating mental health disorders there are, and
Mhm.
that's ranked by the World Health Organization. And I think because I built and sold a successful business in the way that I did, people are like, "I mean, that OCD thing can't be that bad, or your anxiety really can't be that bad because you've, like, harnessed it into the superpower."
Very minimized,
And
sounds like.
they absolutely minimize it,
Mhm.
and I think just because you're functioning doesn't mean that you feel good. And
Mhm.
just
Right.
because, like, you're able to, like, go to work and show up doesn't mean that, like, you have, like, peace in your body or you feel the way that you wanna feel. So, I, it's really hard for me when people minimize OCD because it's really, really hard, or even when they just minimize anxiety because just because you're not outwardly struggling, because a lot of my compulsions are actually mental compulsions. Just because you're not outwardly struggling does not mean that you're not having a really hard time.
Right, right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and you mentioned your business a couple times and, obviously that took a lot of time and energy for you building and scaling that. And then of course, parenting your child who was, chronically ill. How did you navigate those kinds of challenges, between showing up professionally for your business and then also being able to show up and do what you needed to do at home emotionally for her?
I think that was part of why I jumped into OCD treatment in the way that I did. So, I sold my business, and when you sell a business and you want to work inside of it still, everybody talks about integration. Like, you've got to integrate your company into the new company, and that has to be successful for the trajectory of the company. And I say all this to say that it feels super high pressure and super high stakes. So I needed to be able
Mhm.
to show up in my company, and my company is also named after me. It was very much kind of like a personal brand. So people are expecting me to show up, and they're not expecting me to just like show up and hang out. Like they're expecting me to like show up and be a killer and be this like awesome entrepreneur
Mhm.
that I was. And once we made it out of the hospital with Meadow and I was like trying to go back to work, that's why I got the OCD diagnosis so fast. And then what I actually did, as crazy as this sounds, and I like still can't believe I did it this way, was I did an intensive outpatient program for my OCD because I was like, I need to hit this hard. I need to hit this fast because until I do this, I'm not going to be able to show up as a mom and I'm not going to be able to show up the way that I want to at work. And the company that purchased mine was actually based out of California, which gave me this
Mhm.
interesting window of time where I would literally this intensive outpatient program that I did was 3 to 4 hours of therapy every day for about 6 weeks. And
Mhm.
I would schedule my intensive therapy in the morning before California was awake. And then I would
Mm,
take like an
mhm.
hour buffer time and then I would go to work for the rest of the evening.
Okay, wow.
And was
Mhm.
it the ideal way to do it? No. I mean, that was really intense and really hard, and I am very incredibly just so fortunate that me and my husband are such a team, and, he
Mhm.
obviously has his own stuff coming out of the hospital,
Mhm.
but he was really able to show up for me where he was like, "You need this right now, so let me help clear
Mhm.
your path in whatever way I can to make this easier for you to
Mhm.
do." And, like, there's no way that I could have done it in that way without him, and then once I made it through the treatment and I kind of had the skills and the resources and the capacity, then it was just this constant negotiation all the time, and it still is today of, like, okay, if I'm gonna be more present over here, then something has to kinda decline over here, and people talk about balance all the time, and it makes me kinda crazy because there is no perfect balance.
Mhm.
And it really is just an endless negotiation all the time, and that's okay, like, that doesn't have to be an inherent problem.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, and I agree with you. I mean, balance, there is no perfect balance. One of the things I talk to people about a lot is finding, when I use the word balance, it's more about, like, what is the right balance for you, which is some
Mhm,
sort of a a middle kinda ground, even though it's not necessarily, like, right in the middle, and it's changing. It's always changing, based on life, based on circumstances and things like that. So I think that that's so amazing, that your husband was and is so supportive. I mean, I think that that is incredibly important for people, when they do have a strong support system, when they have a supportive partner or whoever it might be, that just it is so valuable in helping us get through whatever challenges we might be facing. So, when you were talking about, before about the anxiety and the OCD and it being all consuming. What were some of the things that you found that actually really helped you? You'd mentioned specific tools, strategies, mindset shifts, any of those kinds of things. What was really helpful for you?
well, number 1 is definitely that exposure and response prevention, like, gold standard for OCD, changed my life forevermore. I do it I do exposures every day.
Mhm.
2 there's, like, these other tools in your toolkit is the way I like to think of it when you have anxiety or you have OCD or whatever the thing is for you, and it's funny now because when my OCD therapist first introduced, like, "We're gonna use the skill of self-compassion," I was like, "That is not for me." I was like, "That's fine for other people if they wanna use that skill," but I was like, "We got 10 options here, like, I'm gonna put that one at the bottom of the list." However, as time has went on, and I also, like I feel like one of the biggest gifts of OCD treatment that I have been given is just, like, this lack of urgency in my life that I've
Mhm.
never experienced before, and part of that is being able to truly give myself more compassion, and the more that I give myself compassion from my experience, the easier it is to give it to others as well. And I'll
Mhm.
just be walking around, I'll be like, "I'm a really great person going through a really hard time right now." And even just,
Mhm.
like, simple phrases and shifts like that have been really monumental for me to be able to, like, meet myself where I'm at in this moment, outside of my business, like, I went through a lot of transitions in the last year, and I can't tell you how many times I've just thought, like, "I'm a really great person going through a really hard time, and that's okay."
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, then, on the flip side of that, were there any things that people maybe suggested, friends, family, coworkers, whoever, that, well intentioned, but just really didn't feel so helpful?
So many people just wanna give reassurance, and I think that the reason that they wanna give reassurance comes from this really pure place of when people hear something really hard, they wanna help or
Mhm.
they wanna fix. And we live in a society where it's uncomfortable to sit with uncertainty, but also to sit with really big feelings like grief. And obviously,
Mhm.
I feel a ton of grief all the time about the motherhood experience I thought that I was gonna have and the motherhood
Mhm.
experience that I'm having. And there can be this really beautiful duality of it isn't what I thought, but I still like I love being Meadow's mom and like we still get to have all these incredible moments and those sorts of things. But I think when people just want to jump in and fix, that doesn't help me at all. Like, if I'm having a really hard day, I just might wanna feel, like, seen and heard and validated instead of
Mhm.
being like, "Oh, like, her next surgery is gonna be no big deal." Like, that's
Mhm.
incredibly invalidating to me, and that's really
Mhm.
hard for me to hear. Or when literally just last weekend, me and Meadow went ziplining, which
Mhm.
is, like, so
Fun.
fun for a 3.5-year-old to be brave enough to do.
Yeah.
Um, but when we do things like that and people see things like that, they're like, "Oh, she's normal now."
Mm.
But that invalidates my past experience and invalidates my future experience.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, "No, we live in this weird middle, and that's okay, but, like, can you just see me in that?"
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that just because I do think that in a lot of situations with a lot of people and their experiences, there can be this um, to your point, desire to fix things, to make things better. I think a lot of times people very much are well intentioned, but to your point, sometimes those efforts are actually doing the opposite, right? And it's really not as helpful because to your point, some of these things that people say in an effort to try to make people feel better actually can feel dismissive and invalidating and things like that. And sometimes just sitting with somebody and trying to, just sort of be present with them is maybe all they're really looking for in that moment. So I appreciate you mentioning that. So then with that in mind, like, how do you personally take care of your own mental health now, while, of course, still prioritizing Meadow's needs?
I've given myself a lot of space, to be honest. Now, I know not everyone has the ability to do that, and I fully recognize, like, what a unique position I am in after selling my business and kind of, like, being able to set up my life in this way. But I give myself a lot of space. I do a lot of work on myself, like, I'm always doing ongoing therapy. I still see my OCD therapist, even if we're just, like, meeting once a month. Even if it's just
Mhm,
a check-in to be like, "Where are you at?" Because the other thing with OCD that I tell people is I'm recovering, I'm not recovered. And
mhm,
so Do I meet diagnostic criteria for OCD today? Probably not, but that could change
Mhm.
next month, and I could have a flare up, and I could start doing compulsions again, and so having that accountability, even if it's just a quick check, is really important, and
Mhm.
I also think just being incredibly intentional about my commitments, and
Mhm.
I've been working on a couple of books for the last year or so, which has been really fun for me. I have a children's book coming out in a few weeks. I'm working on a memoir. Obviously, those take up a lot of space and time, and I need to be like really
Yeah.
zoned in and focused for those. And I found
Mhm.
out, doing that at home was not the space. And so, like, other ways that I care for my mental
Mhm.
health is like I have a workspace outside of my home. And I go there and I'm like, this
Mhm.
is my zoned in time. This is my focus time. And then when I'm out that door, it's like leaving the door literally at work. And I come home and I'm like, okay, like this is
Yeah.
my mom time. But I think something that's actually really important in the in between of those times is I get like a 20-minute drive of transition time too.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
think I underestimated for a long time how important it is for me personally and my mental health to have a break between big different things and to be able to like really show up in the next thing. I need that gap time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, so how would you say your experiences, as a working mom, as a mom of a chronically ill child, as a woman with OCD and anxiety, how have all of those things shaped the way that you support other women today?
Well, as I said, I work with so much less urgency in my life. Another one of my mantras is your urgency is not my emergency, which I love.
Mhm.
And I share that with women all the time,
Mhm.
especially female entrepreneurs. I'm like, their urgency is not your emergency. Thank you. But I think it shapes how I work with women today because through my life experiences, I have been able to have this opportunity to redefine success. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of women get trapped in this whole moving goalpost mentality is like, oh, when I do this thing, I'll rest, or when I do this thing, like I'll feel good, or whatever else. And it's always like a business metric or a goal or whatever the thing is. And, for me, I often had the thought of when I sell my business, like, I've made it, I'll be good. And then when I sold my
Mhm.
business, I had this like crazy event with my daughter and all these things. And so I think about success a lot now through the lens of like, how do I feel in my body? So it's not
Mhm.
a business goal, it's not a metric. It is like, do I feel at peace in my life? And only I can answer that question.
Right.
And if I don't, then there's something that I need to pivot or work on. But as I do coaching, consulting, different things with women specifically, I always like have that success conversation with them pretty early because I know how easy it is to get trapped into that moving goalpost.
Mhm.
And I do think it's interesting to work with me sometimes because I'm going to be using OCD skills all the time, whether you have it or not. And I don't rush to fix anything, and I don't
Mhm.
reassure anxiety away. I'm like, "No, that anxiety is really valid, but how are we gonna work with
Mhm.
it?"
No, and I do think that, I agree with what you're saying about success. And I do think that a lot of people do struggle with that. And to your point, success, what that really means and what that really looks like is not only going to be different for every individual person, but it's also going to change as our lives adapt and adjust. Big life things happen. What might feel successful in one moment might be something completely different, a year later or whatever it might be. And so I agree. I think that it's important to be paying attention to that, knowing that only you can really answer that question for yourself. And if something you mentioned feeling peace in your body, right? So if it's not feeling that way, doing some reflection, self-exploration and seeing what can maybe change so that you can get that, rather than trying to meet some societally
Hmm.
defined
Just keep pushing
image
through.
exactly. So okay. So before we kind of start to wrap up, is there anything else that you really want the listeners to know about your work that you do?
I actually think, and I don't know if I've ever answered this question in this way, but it feels pertinent in this moment, so I'm just gonna go with it. I think that as I was building my business and figuring out who I was and doing all these things, I never, like, paused and had time for hobbies.
Mhm.
And I had a business coach who told me all the time, she's like, you need hobbies, you need fun," and I just totally discredited that. And I
Mhm.
think for any, like, high achieving woman out there in whatever sphere of life you're in, but especially in the sphere of motherhood, having hobbies and having your own identity is really important. And
Mm.
so that's obviously gonna look different for everyone. My
Right.
my big hobby that I do that's really fun for me is I love astrology, which is kind of, like, funny to think
Mhm.
about, like, nurse practitioner turned astrologer. But I do a hobbyist podcast with my best friend, and it forces us to spend
Mhm.
time together, so I get friend time, but I
Mhm.
also get just, like,
Mhm.
enjoyment and fun time too, and I
Mhm.
think integrating that into your life is invaluable.
I love that you said podcast because as I was listening to you, I was thinking about that for myself, and that was gonna be my answer. I feel
It's
like
so
that,
fun.
like yes, it is so fun. I definitely feel like my podcast, although it kind of there's a lot of work that goes into it, but
For
I
sure.
love it, I enjoy it, and it very much, in a lot of ways, feels like a hobby,
Mhm.
like just something to do for
Yeah.
myself and for all the other moms. So, I thought that was funny that you said that. So, people who do wanna learn, more about you, more about the work that you do, where can they go to do that?
I think the 2 easiest places, number 1 is Instagram. So, literally
Mhm.
at Sarah Michelle Boes, but number 2 is my personal website, which is sarahmichelleboes.com. So, either or.
Okay, great. And I will make sure to include those in the show notes for anybody who wants to find you. So before we, say goodbye for today, if you could leave the listeners with one final message, one final piece of advice, one big takeaway from the conversation, what would it be?
I think it's definitely that you can live a really full life alongside uncertainty, alongside anxiety. And I think for a long time, I thought, like, I have to eliminate this anxiety thing to be able to live
Mhm.
my life. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think I
Mhm.
can coexist with it and I can tap into it when it's useful to me, but I also know how to tap out now. And
Mhm.
just remembering that it doesn't have to run the show all the time.
Yeah, yeah, no. Well, and thank you for sharing that. And again, thank you so much for being here. I really, really do appreciate it. And then, as always, for the moms who are listening, if any of this resonates, if you found any of these things that we talked about today to be helpful or valuable, please feel free to look Sarah up. Please share this podcast with other moms that could use some additional support because we're all in this together.